Hello, my name is Paula Leopold, and I'll be demonstrating for you some techniques that will help you to achieve a rich blended appearance with the ease of your colored pencils. Let's begin by first tracing our line drawing onto a smooth piece of paper such as white Stonehenge paper, which is available at art stores. I also like to use white me-tint paper, which is readily available at craft and hobby stores, but I do use the back side, which doesn't have as much texture on it. The front has a little too much of a waffle pattern for my liking, for my finished results, as I prefer to have it very smooth and almost looking like an oil painting when I'm done. I'm going to begin with my white pencil, and a key to successful colored pencil is that you need to start with a very soft, light pressure. The white will hardly show against the white of the paper. You really won't be able to see it until we get the next color in it. But if you start too heavily, you'll build up a waxy resistance too quickly, and you won't be able to get the deep, rich layering effect. The next color I'm using is my lime peel, and I want to put just a light coverage at the bottom of this all the way around, so with a real light pressure. But let me give you a little tip. If you flip this around and come with your pencil facing this direction, it will give you a more natural blending effect. So a heavier pressure right at the very edge, and then lighten up as you come in towards the white. I like to do a small section at a time, so I'll outline on the bottom, and then with small circular little strokes I'll blend upward into the white, easing up on my pressure. So start with the heavier pressure outlining, and then these real small soft circular strokes as I blend, and you'll get a very nice gradation of values, so you won't have any hard line between the lime peel and the white. Once you've done that, do another little section and just continue around. If you have created a few hard lines, you can always come back from the other direction back to your white and pencil with those little tiny circular strokes back down into that lime peel green. And your other option is just to go back to the lime peel, lessen up your pressure, but go up a little higher. My next color will be my kelp green, and you're going to need a good sharp point on that pencil. I'll start with a small little area, and then I'll blend as I go. Now the nice thing about kelp is it's a soft green. It's not a real strong green, but it is slightly darker than our lime peel. We'll put a little area in, and then we still need to blend it because you don't want to have an outlined appearance. The key here is not to have it as wide as the lime peel, so you may need to come back and put a little wider lime peel area. So the lime peel goes down first, and then a lesser amount of the kelp green. And I'm using a fairly light pressure, blending as I go with those small circular strokes. We'll go ahead and finish this side, and then we'll flip it around and do the opposite side. I can't encourage you enough to constantly be moving your penciling project so that your hand is always in a comfortable position. I like to use a little rotating easel. That way I can prop it up a little bit, but it's very easy to turn as my hand moves around to make it very comfortable. That way you get the proper pressure also. We're going to go ahead and use our blush pink in this next area. I'll be using my pencil on the side as opposed to directly on the tip. I don't have a real sharp pencil. It's not real dull either, but what we want to do is just barely lay it on where that graphite tracing was, and then with little circular strokes I'm going to soften upward into the watermelon area, and then I'm going to just gently soften downward into the white rind area, actually blending it into the white. So we don't want to see any hard lines. I'll work this top section just like I did the rind. We're going to do just a little section at a time. I'll blend as I go, and then I'll move to another little section, constantly turning it so my hand again is at a comfortable position to get just the correct amount of pressure. You'll be able to see a lot of pores showing through at this time, which is fine. Once again, because in colored pencils we layer color upon color, you don't want to get too heavy-handed too quickly, which once again is the most common problem I see with people who are just starting with colored pencils, that they're trying to get all those little pores and the distortions in the paper covered, but because we need to put so many more layers on, it will get waxy too quickly if you put too heavy of a pressure down. So now look and see to be sure that you don't have hard lines above or below. If you do, just come back and gently soften just a little bit further with a lighter pressure. Now I'm very lightly going to use a little French gray 30% in the white area. It's a porous texture, and to help create high lows and irregularities, we're going to just very lightly use a buffer color between that blush pink and our lime peel below. You won't hardly be able to see it, but there is some discoloration, which makes it look a little bit more natural. And I'm using pretty large oval strokes as I fill in. You'll see lots of white showing through. Using carmine red in this next step, and I'm going to begin to just pencil over those little irregular graining marks that we laid in with our graphite. And these are pretty thin at this point. You won't need a very heavy pressure. In this little area, it's where my knife started going in, and so there's just a little slice in here. Let's fill that in. Gave it a lot of interest, a little bit more texture. And then along the center area, I'll put a little bit of that carmine red. Now, let me caution you, if your graphite lines are showing through too heavily, go through and just slightly erase them so they're not actually going to appear underneath those graphite lines. Don't forget to dust the crumbles. Then we'll come back and recontinue with those little zigzag areas, just lightly laying them in. I'm even softening as I go in the one direction where I know it will be blended downward into it. So just kind of observe your photos. So once again, I'm blending just slightly as I go. I'm making a little bit firmer geometric shape up in the corner where the slice is, and then further softening along that center edge downward. And then once we have most of our zigzags in, let's go ahead and do some of the seed areas. And this will develop a nice mapping area so we know where we're headed. Now some of these little seed areas are actually sitting back into the hull of the seed area, and so when it was sliced, that little indentation is embedded, so it's actually a little shadowed area. I can still see the light of the seed at this time, but I'm going to fill it in more solidly so I can get that hull appearance or that inset area. And they're all different sizes and angles and shapes. Let's go ahead and move over to the opposite side, and I think I'll begin with the seed areas as I begin this area over here. And every seed is different. We've got white seeds, we've got black seeds, but we can still go ahead and put the red in the area, whether it be an indentation or a little red surrounding that seed. And then in some cases, it'll actually be the little hole or the valley where that seed is sitting into. The color we'll be using in this next area is our blush pink, and you're just very gently going to pencil over the area on the side of your pencil. But right away I can see we're going to have a problem, and that's the darkness of that gray graphite line. So let's just stop a moment and gently remove it with our battery eraser. Don't forget to dust. And you always want to pay attention so that those graphite lines don't get buried underneath your pencil color. We'll return to our blush pink. Once again, we'll use it on the side of the pencil, ensuring that we're not going to get too heavy of pressure. You're going to be able to see through to your paper, but we'll get at least a very soft coverage of this blush pink. And I'm filling in just a little bit more than half of this side, but notice that it's not real regular. It comes up and down at that bottom so that it doesn't look like I'm trying to create straight edges, but a nice soft blushing effect. Now as you're getting down to the bottom of that line, be sure also that you're fading it as you go. You don't want to create an abrupt hard line, so if you need to, just gently go back and fade it a little further. Now at this point, if you think some of the areas are a little too sparse with that blush pink, please feel free to go back in and do just a touch heavier coverage, but we're still on the side of our pencil. We'll add a little bit of this blush pink on the opposite side, and you can pencil right on top of those carmine red zigzag areas. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of blush pink also above some of those larger zigzag areas. This will help create some depth and great texture. It'll make it look more highlighted on top and a little shaded underneath. We can add some additional blush pink around some of these seed areas, creating a highlighted effect using the side of your pencil, a very soft coverage. And then moving to the right, we'll go ahead and highlight around some of those other inset areas. And here again, you can use your own creativity, refer to the original photo, the finished piece, and pencil what you see. Now I'm going to be using my carmine red once again, and we're going to fill in this lower section on the right half of the watermelon. I'm going to use the side of my pencil and just gently begin filling in. It'll appear just slightly darker than that blush pink up above. When you come into that blush pink, though, blend as you go. It's very important, though, that you have all of these irregular markings as you come through here. And if you see another seed area that you want to distinguish, go ahead and fill it in at this time. But don't have that line too straight. We want it to have just lots of interest, a little veining that we're going to begin to create. Let's do just another little section here. So starting at the bottom, I'm actually using a little heavier pressure, but still the side of my pencil, and just moving upward so to create those veining techniques. When you get to a seed, feel free just to come and outline around it. It's fine that it's going to be a little darker in those areas. And then once we've filled it in, we can come back with a little additional heavier pressure, still using that carmine red and creating more of that veining effect that gives watermelon that interest. And it doesn't have to be exactly like you see. Every piece of watermelon is so uniquely different that you can get by with lots of individual variation. I see this line up at the top just a little darker. Also, this top edge could use a little bit heavier color, so we'll use a little bit of carmine red over that original blush pink. Come down the side just slightly. Let's move on to the left side and we'll create the same veining texture. I'm going to outline around the seeds so I don't forget they're there, because I'll pencil with my carmine around them. When I start penciling on the side of my pencil to create that irregular veining effect, I'll use a heavier pressure and sometimes a lighter pressure. And whoops, I penciled over that little seed, so let me stop just a minute and I'll outline it and then continue. But by having a heavier pressure than a lighter, we already are starting to create that veining texture. I'll go ahead and fill in the rest of this left side, still using the side of my pencil. And you're going to see that that left side actually will head towards being just slightly darker because of our right hand light source. So you can build up a little heavier but still use the side of that pencil. Now, I know from teaching this to a couple different groups that the tendency is to take those strokes in one direction, but you actually want to point them all heading up towards the point. Don't pull them off to the side area, but all strokes should head up towards a common point, up towards the tip of that watermelon. I'll come back in here and recoat it just slightly to get it even a little darker, still using my carmine red. And notice that sometimes I'm actually going crosswise across some of those original strokes so that I'm not creating such a grainy appearance, but more of a smoother painted look. Also, by going the opposite way occasionally, you help to fill in the pores a little better. I'll add a few more little zigzags up at the top here. I don't want it quite that smooth, and if you have things that are just too regular or too unusual in shape, go back and distort them slightly. Using our French Gray 90%, we'll fill in some of those seed areas to create the blacker seeds. And you can put in as many as you want. Notice the one on the right is into the watermelon sideways, as the ones on the left side are flatter the way we're viewing it. And then keep variety of sizes and shapes and a variation in the amount. Now, if you want to add a few more, that's just perfectly fine. With our crimson red, we're going to go ahead and create some of these buried seed areas. And so I know there's a seed underneath here, but it's still covered with a little slice of the watermelon. So just gently fill those in a seed shape. Then around some of the other seeds, we're going to want to go back around and maybe outline. But the thing about outlining around these seeds is once you put that line in, you can first score it like I'm doing here, but then you're going to want to go back and just gently soften it with some really tiny circular strokes to blend it away from the seed. You actually don't have to do that technique on every single seed because there's going to be a variety of different looks with that slicing of the watermelon. Refer to your photo once again, and that'll help you to decide which ones you want to do. Now at this point we're going to slow down and complete one side. This is my carmine red and I'm filling it in just a little heavier into some of those lower portions and into some of the veins. At the top I see I need to come back with some additional blush pink. I'm still on the side of my pencil, but I'm filling in with a little heavier pressure, trying to completely fill in the pores of the paper. And then at this point I can take that blush pink down below. I don't want to use a darker color like the carmine red all the time because it might make that meaty look of the watermelon look too red. The problem with the color, if it looks too red, is it looks like it's starting to dry out, like a piece of watermelon that sat in the refrigerator for a few days but wasn't covered. Let me also talk to you at this time about a burnishing technique. Burnishing does a couple things. In colored pencils, we have to layer color upon color, whereas in painting, we would take our palette knife and mix the colors to get the proper hue. But not so with the colored pencils. And so burnishing does two things. It binds color to color, pushing them together, helping them to look richer. It also helps you to fill in the pores of the paper. And the pencil color that I'm using to burnish with is going to be mainly my blush pink, but I can definitely go back into some carmine red and further burnish. That carmine red is still a really soft red color. It's not like the crimson, so on this light side it will work really great to darken and to burnish. But switch back and forth either from the blush pink or the carmine red, and we want to get a completed look. Now most of the time when I do a colored pencil project, I like all of the pores covered, but not so on this moist watermelon. If I get it too solid, it's going to look kind of smushed down and dried out, but I want to keep some of those little holes so it's looking a little bit more porous and fresh looking. Now, once I'm almost finished, I will go back with a tiny amount with a very light pressure of that crimson red, just to deepen just slightly, not too much and not all of the areas. You definitely still want to see a lot of carmine. We're just simply creating a few deeper veining areas. And then back to some additional carmine red at the very top of the watermelon, laying it in with a firm line on the top, but blending it into the blush pink as we go. If you need to create a couple little darker veining areas, you can do that at this time. Using my crimson red, I'll fill that little sliced area in a little darker. Using not too heavy of a pressure, we don't want it waxy, but firm enough that you're actually filling in most of those pores. There's still a few that I can see. Raspberry to darken the deepest point of that slice. So towards the back half of that, I'll use a linear direction with my raspberry, blending as I come towards the front of the cut. Now, let's say you have created a hard line when you put that raspberry in. You can always come back once you've put it in and you didn't blend it just with adjusting your pressure. You can come back with a little bit of carmine red and soften the two together. This will also burnish it at this time, binding color to color and filling in a few of those pores. Let me show you how to develop some of those deep inset seed areas. I'm using my crimson red and just outlining around the seed. That will make that seed look whiter, keep it a nice firm shape on that outer edge and right next to the seed. And look how it looks like it's really inset into that watermelon, and it gives it nice depth and texture. You can do a few of those, creating that little valley around that seed. I'll also deepen a few of those little inset areas where there's no longer a seed, but you can see the little valley of where it was using that crimson red. I'll use that crimson red to establish some additional veining lines that go through the side of the watermelon. But I do want to caution you, remember how I referred earlier to having that dried up old watermelon appearance? And if you fill it in solidly with the crimson, it's going to be too dark and it'll look like it's starting to dehydrate. We'll come back later with some carmine red and fill it in more solidly. But let's go ahead and add some additional vein lines. We're just about finished with this step and we'll be moving on. So go ahead and get that completed. When you're doing an object like this watermelon, I always like to encourage my students, if possible, to go cut a slice of watermelon and actually have it in front of them as they're doing the penciling design. That way you really get some true inspiration and you can see how those veins are developing in that actual piece of watermelon. It's always a fun way of enhancing our ability to see art and then recreate it. We still need to add some shading colors in those white seeds. So using your French gray, 90%, scoring pretty firmly at the bottom, and then I can soften that upward into the seed using my cream. And don't be concerned if you actually blend a little bit of the red carmine color into the seed. It'll be pretty reflective coloring. But let me show you how, if you choose to and want to take out color in a certain area without disrupting everything around it, even the tiniest little bit of area, you can use one of these metal eraser shields. And that way you can take your battery eraser, erase out the coloring or the area that you don't want to continue with. Don't forget to dust and remove that little bit of color. Now some colors are staining colors and they won't be as easy to take out, but the problem is if you try to take out too much area without using an eraser shield, you have to re-begin your layering process beginning with the very first edges. But it's great to clean up a side or an edge or just a small area. Let's go ahead and fill in some more solid seed areas on that right side. This is my cream. It doesn't matter if you use cream or cream plus white. Vary the direction, the shapes, and how far out some of them stick and how they lay into the side. This is my French gray, 90%. And it's stuck in sideways into that slice. Then add a little bit of shading to these lighter seeds using your French gray, 30%. And with a real small circular stroke, I'm blending it upward into that cream. So it's darker at the bottom of that seed and lighter at the top. You can use a little bit of carmine red around some of the seed areas on the right side and then come back and soften even with a little bit of white. Now I'm further burnishing and filling in just a few of those pores, but remember I don't want them all completely filled in, otherwise it'll look like a dried piece of watermelon. We can now go back in with our carmine red and fill in a little bit more solidly. Pay attention though, you don't want to lose all of those nice highlighted areas, but where you see you need a little bit more solid coverage, the carmine pencil color will actually do the trick. You can come back with a little bit of crimson and deepen some of those veining areas, but don't put it in solidly. Once again, it'll take away the freshness of that watermelon, and therefore it won't look nice and moist. I do want it a little darker where the two halves meet, so that color will be your crimson red. So get it just a slight bit darker. Down at the bottom where the rind actually divides going two different directions, we want to use a little bit of that French grade on the left side and blend it towards the left to create the turn. On this top portion, using my carmine red and filling in a little bit more solidly, I still see far too many white pores showing through. Yes, of course I want some, but having that many, it makes it look more like a pastel than a colored pencil painted appearance, which is the richness that I like to achieve. Really is helpful in filling in some of the pores a little bit more thoroughly without getting too dark. And you can just pencil over broad areas. Do the directional stroking that we talked about, trying to create those strokes that all go up towards the top. Now, if you don't have enough of the little white stringy veins, come back with your white pencil and just etch those in. And once again, if you have an opportunity, cut a slice of watermelon and use it as your resource as you're doing this project. It's always fun to see the differences with our actual piece of watermelon. And one thing I've noticed, that different brands are different in the veining look. Some of them are very smooth. Some of the brands have lots of different white veins and different textures. And of course we all know that we have the seedless watermelons. Now here, don't forget to add that little bit of white reflection that you see at the bottom of those seeded areas. Come back with the carmine red to create the firm line right next to that white highlight, which helps me to see it's actually inset into the side of the watermelon. So cleaning up with a nice sharp pencil point. You know, the nice thing about colored pencils is there's no cleanup, and so they're real easy to pick up at one moment and put down. If you have interruptions, it's easy to handle. They're easy to take with you just in a small bag. So as you're working through a project, take your time. Don't get in a hurry and feel like you have to finish it all in one sitting, because that's when we become sloppy. We're just trying to finish it as opposed to creating and fine-tuning each little section. We are getting so close to fine-tuning and finishing this. So here again, just don't get in a hurry. Take your time and enjoy the process. And please do give yourself permission to go back and forth from one color to another to achieve the final appearance. Down at the bottom here, I see that I can come back with a little blush pink and soften the bottom of that darker red area into my rind. So just with that and a heavy pressure, you can blend the two. I'm also coming through here and further burnishing and filling in those pores and binding color to color. Now some of these zigzagged areas are looking a little too pointed, so I'll come back with a little carmine red and soften those so they look a little bit more natural. Something that I saw as I began teaching this is that transparent quality that we can see right down in this right hand corner. So I spontaneously decided to take a little bit of my orange in this area and glaze over it. And I can't even tell you the difference that it made. Just a nice, vibrant, transparent look. So add just a touch of orange down in that lower right corner. Back to a little bit of carmine red and finishing just the fine-tuning aspects. We're almost there, ladies, and hopefully you're getting a beautiful, nice, juicy piece of red watermelon, but not too red. We really want to retain those pink tones. I want to redefine just a few of those little veining areas with my crimson red and help them to look like they're a little deeper inset so it's not so perfectly smooth. And I do want to tell you that when you're doing something that's a little bit more abstract, you have to give yourself the ability to be slightly different than the final appearance. And once again, I encourage you, look at different pieces of watermelon. Each one will be different and unique. So no two will ever be duplicated. Abstract painting is a little bit more difficult because you're being asked to place some of these zigzags in just spontaneous areas. It's much easier to paint within a line and do exactly what you're told to do. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the process. I'm also breaking down some of the larger areas so that they look a little softer. And then one more time with a little bit of crimson red down that center line that separates the angles. We're ready to move on to our strawberries, and here's how we're going to begin. I'm going to be just to the right of those comma strokes we placed in with our graphite, and I know you can't see this. This is my white pencil, but what it's going to do is when we start penciling in the color on the strawberry, it will give it a little bit of resist. Then I want you to come back with your battery eraser and erase the graphite line. So all that's left is actually the white pencil that will give resist. And you'll be able to see it once we get the coloring into that strawberry. Now, this is important. Both of these strawberries are sitting at opposite angles. So in order to get the seeds so they look like they're going in the correct direction, which is up and down, you need to reposition that strawberry so it's right in front of you straight before you start doing the seeds. This first portion, they're going to be round, but later they'll be oval, and we don't want them to point in the wrong direction. All right, let's go ahead and just pencil in those little seed dots with some lime peel. If you see some of the seeds aren't spaced correctly apart, take your battery eraser and just erase them and repencil them. Now in the center area, they can be a little larger. The ones towards the side out of the main focal point will be a little smaller. And that'll help create the depth so that right in that highlighted area, it's actually coming towards you. Have a nice sharp point on your pencil when you're doing this. Let's create those unripened areas in the strawberries. It really doesn't matter where you put them, but it gives interest to the strawberry. I'll first very lightly lay in the jasmine. It'll be a firmer pressure on the outer edge, but as it fades into the strawberry, you want just a breath of pressure. Layer over the jasmine with a light coverage of my orange. Here again, you want to fade it as it's coming into the strawberry so it doesn't create a hard line. The riper area of this section even will have a little stronger orange example in one of the areas. It doesn't have to be equally done. It'll be much more interesting if it isn't done equally. And then different sizes of the ripening areas are always more interesting, as well as in different positions. And then I'll layer over those two colors with a little less of the lime peel color. You can see how these colors are skipping right over the seeds that are below. That pencil color, because we put it in with a real heavy dot, it's giving it nice resist, so it just peeks through our unripened area as well as it will in our redder areas. Now, be sure you don't have a hard line here nor a hard line there. If you do, go back with a little bit of jasmine and soften it further into the strawberry. It's all right if it's a little whiter. Let's take a minute and go ahead and put those seeds on the other strawberry. But I do want to remind you that you should be turning this so the strawberry is up and down towards you so you don't distort the shape of those seed areas. I'm going to go ahead and cover the entire strawberry. We'll use carmine red, and I am on the side of my pencil. As I come into that unripened area, I'm going to pick up on my pressure, use some small circular strokes to blend the two together. You don't want to create a hard line, but I will fill in the rest of the strawberry with this carmine red. Soft pressure. I know you can still see through and see lots of pores, but not to be concerned. We have many more layers to go. You can see where those white strokes that we put in, the little comma strokes next to the seed areas, are now showing because they have a little resist. So the red will just jump right over those little white areas. And then you can go right over to the other strawberry and do exactly the same step simultaneously, or you can complete one strawberry at a time. I find it's a little quicker if you can just do the same steps on both at the same time. On the right side of each of these seeds, we're going to use some raspberry to shade around them. That'll give us the texture and the dimension of our seed. Now, in the highlighted areas, these can appear a little bigger as well as a little bit more oval. The smaller side areas will look and appear rounder. Be sure to be using a sharp pointed pencil, and then also, as a reminder, be sure it's facing up and down towards you so those ovals all point towards the bottom and not off towards the side. And this step is already creating the illusion that there's texture on the strawberry, and those seeds are really popping out. Once you finish the right side on all of these seeds on this first strawberry, go ahead and do the same step on the other strawberry. Keep it on the right side for the raspberry color. And then on the left side of the strawberry, we'll go ahead and put the comma stroke in, or the outlining, with a sharp pencil of crimson red. So it's a little lighter on that left side. Good strong shadow marks will help it to really have that seed set in and just have that seed pop. And don't be concerned if the strawberry seed itself gets a little misshapen and distorted. We can come back and clean those areas up in the fine-tuning stages. I could say a little pinker area. It could be a little bit of reflected highlight down at the bottom edge of this strawberry. I'm using my blush pink to fill in a little bit more solidly. I don't want this area as bright of a red as the rest of the strawberry will appear. I'm using a heavier pressure on the outer edge, and so I'm starting to create some crumbles. So please dust often so those don't get embedded below your pencil coloring. And then as you move into that strawberry, you want to pick up on your pressure, and you'll be fading as you go, so not to create a hard line. Now the other thing is you want to fill in those pores at this time, so get a heavier pressure. We don't want this to be porous like we did on our watermelon, and eventually the rest of the strawberry will be filled in very solidly. I'm going to use my carmine red to start filling in. I'll begin in the highlighted area, and I'm going to come around each little seed using a heavier pressure, but not too heavy. We still have more colors to put in. I'm becoming a little bit more solid. I'm using my carmine red. Now, where I've put one of those white resist areas, I'll come up to that and pencil around it, and I can definitely tell that's too white at this point, but it'll be real easy to come back and fine-tune momentarily. When you go into an area that you know is going to be really a dark area, well then don't put carmine red in that area. If you get too heavy with that carmine, your darker value won't appear as dark as it needs to be. So let's go in the lighter areas of the red and fill in with our carmine red using those little tiny circular strokes. We do want to give the fullness of the strawberry a light coverage with this carmine red. The area that I was talking about not to fill in is right underneath those little leaves. They're called brocks. The top of the strawberry, the green leafy area. That way it'll have a nice dark shaded effect. We will also put a shadow in on that left side, but we want this as an underglow underneath the darker shadow color. One of the most frequent questions I get asked is, how do you know what colors to use? And the only thing I can encourage people is it's a trial and error. The same way we learned in mixing oil paints to get a particular hue that we were trying to create. Yes, there is some theory involved in it, but in colored pencils, what I often do is have the same type of paper right off to my side. That way I can do a little trial and error and practice. If one thing doesn't work, I can always try something else. But don't be afraid of experimenting. Add a little bit of shadow area now coming down that left side using our crimson red. I'll use a firmer pressure than I was before, but I am using those small little circular strokes so I can blend as I go. So as I move into that reflected highlight, I don't want to create a hard line, so pick up on your pressure and blend as you go. The same way with on the left side, you're going to have to blend that into the existing carmine red area. Notice how the angle of that shadowed area is going to curve, following the shape of the strawberry itself. So as I'm coming down, it's actually not going to be as wide as it was on the top. When I get to the bottom, I'll slightly curve it back up. So just watch here for a moment. I'll come back up to the top and just give it a little heavier coverage to begin the deeper shaded effect. And I'm actually penciling fairly hard right in this area. Go right up to the seeds though, and up to the leaves when you're doing that shadowing effect. If you have created hard lines on either side of that shadowed area, come back with the color that it lays next to. Example, on the left reflected highlight area, come back with some blush pink using those little tiny circular strokes to help blend it. I can even come back with just a touch more crimson red and soften that back into that blush pink area. The opposite side, you can use some additional carmine red. This reflected highlight area was just a little too wide anyway, so I'm in good shape to pull that crimson back into that blush pink area. I'll also go on the right outer edge with just a touch of shading color that will help it have the proper contour so it doesn't look flat. So using a little bit of crimson red right on that outer edge, I'll pick up on my pressure as I'm blending it into the carmine red area. We'll further darken in that shadowed area using our raspberry. I'll use little tiny circular strokes around the seed areas, picking up as I go towards the outer area of the crimson red to blend and not create a hard line. Now, as you're coming up towards the seeds, you don't actually have to go in all the way next to the seed, and you can see that nice little glow of a highlighted look around the seed, which gives it more depth and texture. As you're using a little heavier pressure, you're also going to see that it's getting just a touch waxy at this point, and that's fine. Remember, we do want to fill in all those little pores. The most important thing is to watch is that you're not creating hard lines, but nice, soft, faded, gradated areas. I'll curve this around a little bit at the bottom, and then I'm actually going to pull just a slighter amount along that right edge. I don't have to pull it all the way to the top of that, and then fade it in and to that crimson color that we first laid in for the first value of shading color. Let's lay those shaded areas in underneath the box. First, I used a little bit of the crimson red, and then I'm coming back with a lesser amount of the raspberry. Typically, where you see those little V formations, we know it's going to be the darkest shaded area. So come back with even a little stronger shading in those V areas. Blend as you go. And if you've created a hard line here, come back with a little bit of carmine red and soften the two colors together. A white gel roller is the best and most effective way of creating strong white highlight areas on a colored pencil project. You can use that gel roller by using just these tiny little connecting dotted lines around where you want the brightest areas. Now, don't be concerned that this is just a little too white at this point. We'll come back and clean that up. Other areas, we really may want a little bit more textured, pitted appearance by truly dotting it but not connecting those little dots. If you think your pen has clogged, just go over to a clean piece of white paper and just begin to roll it again. First I try dotting it, and then it'll just start rolling. And that clean flow, once it starts, come back to your colored pencil project, and with little tiny dots, just go ahead and finish filling it in. Now, refer often to your colored pencil photo, because sometimes these highlights are on the bottom side, sometimes they're on the left or the right, but you can do it in a variety of formation to give it a really sharp, shiny look. Most importantly, though, we want to keep the brightest area in that upper quadrant in the strongest highlighted area, and then lesser whites outside of that brightest area. Here I'm using a little bit of carmine red to clean up those irregular highlight marks in those seed areas. I'm reshaping the seed or the highlight area using a little bit of that crimson red on the left side. If you feel like you didn't want a highlight where you've placed it, just pencil over it. Here you can see how that white gel pen just didn't easily roll off the tip of the pen, but by putting the little dots on it, it really releases very nicely a nice strong white. A lot of times if I get it on too bright, I'll just take my fingertip and just tap lightly over it, and that just picks up a tiny little bit. These are so important to creating a realistic strawberry that has the nice shaded areas as well as the strong highlighted areas. So you'll want to slow down and fine tune each little area as you go, coming back and forth from the white to the shading looks. And I'll cover the shadowed areas in a little bit. Let's get all the white areas in. If you need to reshape a small area like this, do at this time. You can also remember that the ovals right in the dead center aren't necessarily as round. They can be just a slight bit more oval. For sure at this point, don't get discouraged if it's looking a little unrefined and a little messy, because we'll come back and clean all these little areas up. Just get several highlights in. Look how strong that's appearing, and if you squint a little bit, you're going to get the finished appearance. We know close up we can see the little imperfections, but we'll get those taken care of. I'm now going to begin the refining process. I'll use my crimson red and first of all go around the inside of that seed. It'll clean up both the seed line and the highlight line. Now remember to have that facing right directly towards you, so it's straight up and down, so you don't get those off. So that they tilt towards one angle, one side or the other. Keep it facing right towards you. Then I'm coming back with some carmine red and thinning down those highlight areas so they're really slender and very reflective looking. If they're too wide, they look artificial. I can always come back with a little extra strong dot of white if I've taken it down too far, but it truly is a back and forth motion. So the more you take your time and refine it, the prettier it will become. Let's say that those seed dots are not quite bright enough. Well, you can come back with a little dot of white gel pen and go on top of them. One of the fun things is a lot of times you can just place a little brighter dot at the top edge of that seed and see the green below it. If you get too much white on, then you'll want to come back with a little glaze of lime peel below it so that the light is on the upper part of the seed and lime peel is on the lower portion of the seed. The brocks are filled in very lightly with jasmine using the side of our pencil. If you need to clean out some of the tips of those leaves because you got too heavy-handed with the red, just take a moment, use your battery eraser and gently erase that area, giving a nice point. We'll then take our kelp pencil and just slightly outline each little leaf with a zigzagging motion. Right above the flip, I'll put a little bit of kelp and soften it towards the tip of the flip, and we'll also place in the center vein. I'll go ahead and slightly soften then at the back of the leaves and pick up on my pressure so it fades as it comes into the leaf. I'll do that little center portion where all of the little brocks come together, and then just moving through one by one the little zigzagging stroke, outlining and softening as we go. Now typically I don't like to bring that center vein all the way to the tip of the leaf. It makes it look a little softer and more natural if you don't do that. So it's just my personal preference. It's not a right or a wrong. We'll also be establishing which leaf is on top and which is underneath. And if you know it's underneath, go ahead and do that little extra bit of shading at this time, blending as you go, just like I'm doing in this area at the back of this little leaf. I'll come back in with a little lime peel and soften that kelp green into the jasmine with a real light pressure, and I'm just using a little zigzagging back and forth stroke to soften that. Watch your pressure so you're not getting too heavy. The detail in these little leaves is really vague. We don't want it to compete with the detail in the strawberry or the watermelon, but we do want it to be a nice little complement to the two pieces of fruit. You'll also want to put a little jasmine around the tips of those or in between the leaves. We want it to be more of a greenish look. We don't want to leave a lot of the jasmine below, but the jasmine will be our highlight. So even on those outer edges, come back with a little bit of additional lime peel. We're just softening as we go. And actually, you can move back into a little bit of the kelp green if you don't have an area dark enough. I usually do that just because it's really hard to distinguish where your values are to be the darkest and the lightest until you get them all placed in. And then once you see them all together, it's real easy to go back and make some darker, some lighter. I'll use a lesser amount of the white to strengthen the highlight, but also at this point I'm burnishing and filling in all the pores, binding color to color also. You'll find that you have to use quite a bit heavier of pressure at this time to do the burnishing. I think I'll go ahead and add just a little additional kelp for darker shading. You might even want to pull some out of the vein to make it look just a little softer. When I paint or pencil leaves, I like a few of the streaks. It gives a little bit more interest and some movement to it. Now, I'm not talking about hard lines. I'm talking about just some gentle little streaks, tiny little thin lines. I'm adding a few tints in the leaves. I'll begin with a light coverage of blush pink and then a lesser amount of the carmine red, blending as I go. I might even occasionally in some of those little V areas add some carmine, but I'll show you that in just a moment. You can place those tints at the tips or at the edge of a leaf or even at the bottom of a leaf. One place where I never put it is in the highlight area directly. You can see how I'm using those little short circular strokes to soften and blend as I go. Here's one of those little areas where I'll add a little bit of that crimson red back into the V shape where it's nice and shadowed. Beautiful place to add tints. It would actually be very lovely to add a little bit of that tint color in any of those V formations where they're coming together. It isn't necessary to go into those V's first with your blush. You can actually go directly to the carmine red and then with a lesser amount of that crimson red. I'm going to go ahead and add just a touch more kelp green underneath that flipped edge. That way it'll help it to roll better. It looks just a touch too light, so fading it upward into the flip. The center looks like it could have just a touch of highlight. So using your white, you can go ahead and place a little of that in, and you'll need to use a really heavy pressure. I could even take just a dot of my gel pen to amplify that and brighten it just slightly. I hope you've enjoyed watching the demonstration of my colored pencil technique, and it might encourage you to try this wonderful medium. Please visit my website, www.paulaleopold.com, and look at the wide variety of colored pencil projects that we carry.